15 gems, Earth's most secretive birthstones. They are not featured in modern jewelry guides. They aren't marketed with anniversaries, zodiac signs, or engagement milestones. And yet, these 15 stones once held the weight of civilizations. Some were hidden in shrines for centuries before being unearthed. Others replaced human senses in ancient burial rituals. A few were never sold, because no one was allowed even to touch them. And there are those whose entire meaning has been lost, preserved only in fragments, carved, worn, buried, forgotten. This is not a list of popular gems. This is a descent into secrecy, into geology shaped by myth, into minerals chosen not for sparkle, but for silence. From stones buried to keep empires safe, to those still whispering through volcanic glass, we explore 15 gems that weren't just rare. They were intentionally hidden. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 15th, Beryl, the clear stone for unrecorded births. A steel point, a pale, clear disc, no parchment, no ink. From the 14th to the early 17th centuries, in a handful of Catholic monastic communities across southern France, parts of Austria, and the alpine valleys of northern Italy, a silent procedural habit emerged, one that had nothing to do with ritual, but everything to do with omission. The church maintained strict boundaries around life events. Baptism was not just theological, it was bureaucratic. A child not baptized within the prescribed time frame or born under disputed parentage didn't exist within the formal ecclesiastical structure. No name entered the parish ledger, no column marked their arrival, no reference preserved its place. But monastic orders, particularly those managing orphanages or birthing shelters, were meticulous in record-keeping, even when canon law refused them the categories to file under. In response, they developed a non-sacramental record medium, thin wafers of colorless goshenite, the most chemically stable form of beryl, sourced through secular trade. Each piece was roughly the size of a small coin, uncut, undecorated. Onto the flat face, a monk or midwife would inscribe, using a heated iron stylus or steel pin, a simple set of birth data, time, day, a code name or initial, mother's physical condition, and, sometimes, the name of the midwife who delivered. The inscriptions were never ornamental, no script, no flourish, only procedural marks. Once etched, the goshenite disc was wrapped in beeswax-soaked linen, encased in a folded tin or lead envelope, sealed with plain wax, and deposited into structural voids within the monastery itself, behind niches, beneath stairwells, or embedded into supporting walls. It wasn't meant to be reaccessed. It wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't even meant to be acknowledged in speech. These stones did not serve theology. They served internal memory. Archaeological evidence is rare but not absent. In 1924, during structural repairs at the former Cistercian convent of Sainte Croix in Lyon, 4 sealed capsules were discovered behind the apse wall. One had been compromised by moisture, but the remaining 3 contained intact goshenite fragments, one of which bore 6 micro-incisions. No names, but dates, initials, and hour notations match those found in informal kitchen ledgers of the time. Scholars analyzing the find determined that the stones were never meant for retrieval. They weren't emergency backups, nor were they sacred artifacts. They were simply entries with no category, recorded to fulfill administrative convenience. Goshenite itself offered the perfect medium. It did not cloud. It resisted heat and chemical change. It was cheap, stable, and nearly invisible when polished. Unlike emerald or aquamarine, goshenite had no identity as a gemstone. It was rarely set in jewelry, never named in liturgical inventories, and held no symbolic weight in Christian iconography. And that neutrality was key. Where ink would have legitimized and parchment would have risked interception, goshenite offered a durable silence. It did not declare. It did not interpret. It simply held the data until the wall swallowed it. There is no record of any church-sanctioned acknowledgement of this practice. No council ruling forbids it. No doctrine explains it. However, the presence of these stones, quiet, repeated, and consistent across space and time, suggests a deliberate institutional memory that transcends formal permission. No prayers were assigned to the children archived in goshenite. No ritual was given. No rite was denied. They were neither lost nor counted, only noted. Ranked 14th, Malachite. The midwife's birthstone of Eastern Europe. No ledger lists it, no archive of how many there were, but midwives remembered what to reach for. In rural villages across Eastern Europe, from the 16th to the 19th centuries, one green stone was kept in folded cloth, in wooden drawers near the basin and the blade. Malachite. This wasn't temple use. It wasn't pharaonic. It wasn't spoken of in church. It sat quietly in the midwife's kit, polished or uncut, sometimes wrapped in wool, sometimes bare. Its presence wasn't symbolic. It was functional, practical. Constant malachite, a copper carbonate hydroxide mineral, is soft by gem standards, easily scratched and easily broken, but it held a deep, concentric green unlike anything else in the birth chamber. Its bands, circular, irregular, layered like tree rings, were said in local oral accounts to match the breathing rhythm of the mother. When contractions began, the malachite stone was placed under the birthing mat. In some regions, it was dipped briefly into water that would be used to wash the newborn. Elsewhere, it was sewn into the inner corner of swaddling cloth, not to bless the child, but to shield the process. The stone wasn't used for every birth, only when complications were suspected, or when the mother had lost children before, or when the father's name wouldn't be written. Midwives didn't explain why it was used. They didn't record it. The use of malachite passed through gesture and imitation, not scripture. Some said it absorbed pain. Others said it attracted the eye of the forest, taking the attention off the mother. But most said nothing. In Carpathian records from the late 1700s, a few legal documents mention a green charm stone, found during inheritance disputes, usually unclaimed, placed among objects labeled as tools of the woman's hand. Occasionally, malachite fragments were buried in the threshold of a home after a stillbirth, or left beneath the stove if a child survived against odds. There was no official term for this role, no classification of malachite as a birthstone. It never appeared in Slavic almanacs or mineralogical texts tied to natal calendars. Its presence was informal, invisible to science, invisible to doctrine, but known to women who had delivered more lives than they could name. And still, the stone was not considered sacred. It wasn't carried. It wasn't prayed to. And once a birth was completed, it was cleaned and returned to the drawer, where it waited again. By the mid-19th century, the role of the midwife had been overtaken by state-licensed obstetricians. Sterile instruments replaced birthing kits. Cloth was replaced by paper. The objects that could not be standardized were set aside, lost, sold, or kept without context. Malachite, soft and opaque, did not survive the transition well. Few were cataloged. Fewer remained in use. But in the households that still whispered through generations, not what was said, but what was done, the memory of the green stone lingers. Its curves are not smooth. Its lines do not repeat. But it was picked up again and again, at a moment when breath slowed and outcomes blurred. And it did what no one asked it to do. It stayed. Ranked 13th, Obsidian, the naming blade of Mesoamerican birth rituals. The sound wasn't ceremonial. It was sharp, functional. Stone striking clay, bone, or wood. In the highland communities of Mesoamerica, long before contact with European systems of naming or recording, obsidian marked the first breath with silence. Obsidian, a natural volcanic glass formed when lava cools rapidly, was valued not for its color or sparkle, but for its ability to cut with precision. Among the Zapotec, Mixtec, and early Nahua peoples, it was the first material tool introduced in the birthing space, sharper than metal, more consistent than bone. But its sharpness wasn't just physical. It defined the threshold between being and not being. In these cultures, naming was not an immediate process. A child did not receive a name at the moment of birth. Instead, birth was followed by a waiting period, typically lasting 4 to 7 days, during which the survival of the newborn was assessed. Only then would a naming ceremony occur, often based on the Tonal Pahwali, a 260-day ritual calendar tied to lunar and planetary rhythms. Until that name could be assigned, a substitute existed. A glyph, representing the child's birth sign or calendrical symbol, was carved into a piece of wood, bone, clay, or occasionally onto a shard of obsidian itself. These objects were not decorative. They were small, roughly worked, and rarely survived long enough to be passed down to future generations. But they served a single function: to hold space for a life not yet fully confirmed. In some regions, the glyph-bearing obsidian shard was buried under the threshold of the home, placed beneath the baby's sleeping mat, or tied into the mother's waist wrap. If the child died before receiving a name, the shard was left where it was. It wasn't retrieved, it wasn't destroyed, it was simply no longer spoken of. Some modern excavations at Monte Alban and Teotitlan have uncovered groupings of such objects: figurines, date tokens, and carved obsidian flakes, positioned not in ceremonial plazas or temples, but under household structures, storage platforms, cooking stones, or interior floor pits. No grave markers accompanied them, no offerings, just objects placed with clarity and purpose, sealed in domestic silence. Unlike jade, which marked elite status or continuity, obsidian served as a placeholder for what might or might not continue. It didn't confirm, it didn't promise, it waited. Its material nature was perfect for the role. Obsidian doesn't fade, but it fractures. It reflects light, but holds no color. It can be worked easily, but never without risk. To those who used it, the stone's traits mirrored the moment: birth as potential, not certainty. When the child survived and a name was granted, the shard, if still intact, was buried, forgotten, or broken in two. If the child had not survived, the shard would have remained untouched. There was no ritual of mourning, only non-interruption. Obsidian, unlike most stones, was not a charm, not a signifier of luck or divine presence. It was a tool that listened, without intervention. It didn't offer protection, it didn't hold value, and it didn't need to be remembered. One midwife recorded only what she cut. Ranked 12th, Peridot, the solar birthstone, hidden on Serpent Island. A chamber sealed from sunlight. A copper basin filled with red sand and water infused with blue lotus. A green stone lay at the center of the floor, not to shine, not to mark status, but to channel presence. This was the function of Peridot when mined from the volcanic crust of what is now called Zabergad Island, deep in the Red Sea. To most, it is a gemstone, bright, affordable, birthstone of August. However, in the priestly orders of ancient Egypt, particularly during the 18th and 19th dynasties, it played a completely different role. Not celebratory, not decorative, but calendrical and ritual. The stone was not assigned to a person, it was assigned to a moment. Among temple records on the Nile's southern border, Philae, Edfu, Kamambo, fragments describe Peridot placed in sealed birthing quarters when a child was expected under specific lunar alignments. These were not ordinary births. The infants were either royal by blood or destined for the priesthood, sometimes both. The stones marked not the birth of a body, but the arrival of a designation, a role that had been predicted before conception. Peridot, known to the priesthood as a stone of solar transmission, was not worn by the mother. It was placed beneath the birthing surface or inside the foot basin beside the bed. Some records suggest it was left inside the chamber for 3 days following delivery, untouched, then collected with gloved hands and returned to the temple's inner stone room. It wasn't named, it wasn't inscribed, it was neither cursed nor blessed. The act of placement was the only gesture. In one damaged temple ledger from Elephantine, a scribe notes, "Green fragment returned, uncracked. Entry marked. No stone to follow. There is no interpretation attached, no explanation of meaning. But within this and similar entries lies a logic. The stone existed only to bear the occurrence, not to witness it or transform it. Unlike the symbolic lapis of the heavens or the protective carnelian of bloodlines, Peridot was procedural, material, optical, inert. Its transparency to sunlight and resistance to corruption made it ideal not as a talisman, but as a medium of birth-bound calibration, much like the water clock or the sundial. It served to hold a place in a ritual that made no space for delay or improvisation. Its origin mattered. Only Peridot, drawn from the Red Sea island, known then as the Serpent Rock, was suitable. The mining of this material was controlled by temple authority and occurred only during set lunar cycles. Guards accompanied the caravans. No stone was left unturned for private use. Peridot was not in circulation. In the centuries following the fall of pharaonic Egypt, the island and its restrictions faded from cultural practice. During the Roman period, the site was reopened, this time for decorative quarrying. By the medieval Islamic period, its ritual function had vanished entirely. The stone re-entered markets. Later still, it became a trade gem, eventually a birthstone. August, Leo, commerce. But the peridot placed beneath the beds of oracle children. That peridot was never cut, set, or remembered. It was returned to its chamber, and from there, never spoken of again. No blessing, no inscription, no ceremony, only silence. Ranked 11th, Demantoid Garnet, the forgotten birth gem of a vanished calendar. Among the gemstones of the Tsarist court, few glowed with the strange internal fire of green demantoid garnet. With a dispersion rating higher than that of diamond, it flickered with spectral light under candle and gas lamps. But behind its brilliance lay a quiet assignment, one that never made it into the global lists and was never officially reinstated. For nearly 4 decades, demantoid was the unofficial stone of New Year births under the Russian Empire. It wasn't part of the ecclesiastical calendar. It didn't appear in Orthodox Church rituals. But within the late 19th century imperial registry offices, particularly under the reign of Alexander III and Nicholas II, garnet, and especially green demantoid from the Urals, was paired with children born in their early days of January. The reason was bureaucratic, not astrological. The Julian calendar, used in the empire until 1918, placed Orthodox Christmas on January 7th, well after Civil New Year. To distinguish children born in the week between the secular and sacred holidays, some regional governors authorized the use of greenstone markers for birth tokens and documents. Demantoid, sourced from the Ural Mountains and polished in St. Petersburg, was adopted for this purpose. It was not given to the child, it was not worn, it was set into a seal pressed into the back of the registry page, or embedded into a commemorative clasp stored by the family or by the local office. In some cases, the stone was broken and mixed into the wax seal of the birth notice, a practice noted in estate files from Kazan, Perm, and Oriel between 1885 and 1907. Its use was regional, inconsistent, but real. No official decree ever canonized demantoid as a January birthstone, but in personal correspondences, especially among notaries, provincial registrars, and estate clerks, the pairing was understood. Demantoid child, in some handwritten annotations, referred to those born between January 1st and 7th. The association was aesthetic, seasonal, and administrative, not spiritual, but it ended abruptly. After the 1917 revolution, all registry procedures tied to the monarchy or state privilege were halted. Birth calendars were standardized. The Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian calendar in February 1918. Regional variations were erased. Garnet, still abundant, remained a gemstone. But demantoid's winter-specific function was no longer mentioned and never restored. When Western jewelers codified monthly birthstones in the 20th century, garnet remained January's choice. However, the version that entered the charts was deep red Peridot, sourced primarily from Bohemia and later from Africa. Its selection had nothing to do with Russian practice, nor with the birth clusters demantoid had once signified. No public list has ever been corrected to reflect this. No reparation exists in the gem trade. Demantoid remains known, but detached from birth. Its origin as a state-administered seasonal marker has faded, not because the stone lost relevance, but because the institution that used it ceased to exist. And so the question remains, was it ever truly a birthstone, or just a footnote in the paperwork of a vanished empire? Ranked 10th, Chrysoberyl cat's eye, a stone of ocular precision and selective devotion. A cabochon sliced and polished, not for beauty, but for alignment. What emerges is not color, brilliance, or transparency. It is a line, a single concentrated slit of light across the dome. This is Chrysoberyl cat's eye, and to gemologists, it is not a phenomenon. It is a result of structure, of orientation, of rarity understood only through trained eyes. The technical name is cymophane, a variety of chrysoberyl exhibiting strong chatoyancy. The effect is created by microscopic, needle-like inclusions, usually rutile, arranged in a tight, parallel formation. Light reflects off these inclusions to form a band that appears to glide across the surface, resembling a feline pupil. But the visual is only half the truth. True cat's eye chrysoberyl must meet a standard that most stones fail to meet. The line must be sharp, centered, and move cleanly across the dome when rotated. Anything less, and the stone loses its right to the name. Chemically, chrysoberyl is beryllium aluminium oxide, a mineral distinct from both the beryl and quartz families. Its hardness, 8.5 on the Mohs scale, places it above most colored stones, second only to corundum and diamond in durability. This strength enables it to maintain the cabochon shape indefinitely, without surface wear or distortion of the chatoyant line, even under prolonged wear. But its value isn't technical, it's cultural. In Sri Lanka, where the finest specimens are found, the cat's eye is not just admired, it is feared, respected, and worn for its protective properties. Known as Lasunia in Vedic astrology, this stone is said to carry the energy of Ketu, the lunar node of shadow associated with spiritual detachment and sudden reversals. Wearing it was historically limited to those with exact astrological alignment, never as decoration, only as an instrument. In that context, misusing a cat's eye wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Ceylonese gemstones began entering Western markets, cat's eye chrysoberyl was often confused. Jewelers labeled it by its appearance, cat's eye, but other stones, such as quartz and tourmaline, also exhibited chatoyancy, leading to mislabeling. Only gemological institutions later enforced the rule. If it is not chrysoberyl, it must not be sold as cat's eye without qualification. This distinction, albeit bureaucratic, ultimately defined rarity in the global market. Today, top-grade specimens come almost exclusively from Sri Lanka, and to a lesser extent, from Brazil. Their body color ranges from honey brown to greenish yellow, but color is not their primary characteristic. It's the line, the sharpness of the eye, its ability to bisect the stone cleanly under a single overhead light. Stones with milk and honey effect, where one side glows and the other darkens under light, are valued even higher. Auction records for top specimens have surpassed $30,000 per carat, but price rarely dictates demand. Most buyers are not gem investors, but rather individuals with personal or cultural reasons to acquire a single stone, usually one. It's not accumulated, it's selected. Unlike flashy gems that chase light, chrysoberyl cat's eye controls it. It does not sparkle, shimmer, or dazzle. It focuses, it centers. And in that stillness, it asks for nothing but precision, of eye, of cut, of purpose. No celebrity made this gem famous. No crown or museum display defines it. Its status remains largely underground, known to gem collectors, spiritual practitioners, and technical cutters who understand that this isn't a stone for the masses. It never was. What survives in the modern market is not hype, but criteria, and stones that meet those criteria are vanishing. Mines are exhausted, new sources are inconsistent, and fakes, especially quartz imitations, outnumber the real by 10 to 1. Only with magnification, spectral analysis, or laboratory grading can the actual stones be confirmed. And most are never submitted. They sit in drawers, in temples, in family collections passed on with rules. Never worn unless advised, never sold without purpose. This is not a gemstone for all hands. It is for the few who know what to look for and why. Ranked 9th. Moonstone, a mineral, where clarity never meant transparency. No birth certificate, no recorded discovery, just appearances, soft, shifting, partial. Rainbow Moonstone is not a gemstone of answers. Despite the name, it isn't a moonstone in strict geological terms. It belongs not to the orthoclase family, but to Labradorit feldspar. Yet tradition continues to classify it by optical effect, rather than crystal structure. Its identity was shaped not through documentation, but through folklore. The stone shows a dulescence, an ethereal glow, caused by internal lamellar structures that diffract light. But unlike traditional moonstone's blue sheen, this variety disperses a full spectrum of colors: gold, green, violet, and blue. It doesn't reflect like a diamond nor shine like a ruby. It hovers, faintly, like a memory. While Sri Lanka exported some of the first notable specimens, the most vivid pieces today are mined in India and Madagascar. Yet even now, no museum centers it, no government stamps it as heritage. It doesn't belong to national identity. It circulates through ritual, mourning ornaments, protective charms, and bridal gifts. There is no central myth, no sanctioned legend, just a continuous appearance across cultures, especially in South Asia, where it is used without proclamation. Geologically, rainbow moonstone belongs to the triclinic system, with a Mohs hardness of 6 to 6.5. Enough to resist scratches, but too fragile to facet easily. That's why nearly all pieces are cut cabochon, not by convention, but because faceting often fails. Its glow comes not from pigment, but from light scattering across nanoscopic feldspar layers, a phenomenon invisible to the naked eye, barely understood before electron microscopy. Each gem behaves differently. Some are dull white, others electric blue. The market doesn't follow carat logic. A small, vivid piece may fetch more than a large, cloudy one. Yet rainbow moonstone is rarely auctioned, rarely insured, rarely archived. It has value, but it doesn't chase prestige. It appears in spiritual sets, bohemian jewelry, and viral trends, but not in catalogs of legacy stones. GIA may mention it. Auction houses mostly do not. Museums might keep it in storage, unlabeled or grouped with common feldspars. It isn't rising, it isn't collapsing, it just persists, quiet, unclaimed, and still traded. And if you open an old wooden jewelry box, somewhere between a broken silver clasp and forgotten glass beads, you may find it, ungraded, unnamed, but always there. Ranked 8th, turquoise, the gem that carried an empire's heaven. A turquoise that once graced royal seals and sacred architecture. The Iranian sky type is neither the brightest nor the most durable, but its shade, an airy celestial blue with faint golden veining, carries a cultural gravity unmatched by other gemstones. For over 7,000 years, mines in Iran's Nishapur region have produced this distinctive variety. Nestled between an arid desert and a mountain basin, these deposits were considered divine anomalies by early Persian civilizations. The stone's formation depends on rare interactions between acidic copper-bearing solutions and aluminium-rich host rocks, a process sensitive to pressure, rainfall, and even seasonal bacterial activity. In geological terms, it's fragile, yet in human history, it became indestructible. During the Achaemenid Empire, turquoise was carved into amulets and embedded in weaponry, believed to channel favor from the god Ahura Mazda. By the Sasanian period, it adorned royal headpieces and Zoroastrian ritual objects. Its symbolic power had nothing to do with scarcity. At the time, it was relatively accessible. Instead, its value was tied to its perceived function: to protect, to dignify, and to unify the empire with the sky. When turquoise left Persia, it never carried the same meaning again. In other regions, it became a decorative element. In Iran, it remained sovereign. What makes the Iranian sky type distinct isn't just color, it's structure. Unlike American turquoise, which is often stabilized with resins to prevent crumbling, Nishapur turquoise can remain unaltered if stored correctly. Its matrix pattern, those delicate golden or brown spiderweb lines, is neither chaotic nor dominant. It frames the blue rather than distorting it. This balance is part of what made it essential in Islamic architecture. The domes of Safavid mosques in Isfahan, for example, featured turquoise glaze to signify divine ascent. The stone migrated into verse and philosophy. Rumi's works mention it as a metaphor for unattainable clarity. But ironically, the more symbolic weight it gained, the more its actual usage declined. Modern extraction is limited, and much of what is sold as Persian turquoise today is either from depleted surface veins or entirely misattributed. Iran's government has tried to regulate its turquoise trade several times, mostly to protect local artisans. But cheap imitations from China and dyed stones from North Africa have flooded international markets. The sky type has become so closely copied that its uniqueness is now preserved mainly through provenance documentation, rather than visual traits. And yet, serious collectors still distinguish it on sight. They don't look for perfection. They look for saturation without gloss, for veins that breathe rather than slice, for color that doesn't shout but settles. Unlike rubies or emeralds, turquoise rarely appears at the center of auction headlines. But it remains one of the most counterfeited stones in the world, precisely because, for those who know, it is unmistakable. When a museum acquires a genuine sky-type piece from the Safavid or Seljuk period, it's not simply acquiring a gem, it's restoring a fragment of cosmology. Its value isn't dynamic. It doesn't track with gold, doesn't spike with mining scandals. Instead, its worth is anchored to heritage, tied to the soil, the scripts, the shrines. This turquoise wasn't just mined, it was entrusted. Ranked 7th. Zircon, the stone that refused to burn. Zircon is not born from thermal refinement or deliberate enhancement. It emerges on rare occasions in a saturated tone without having ever been heated. These unheated blue zircons are not only geologically exceptional, but they are also statistically improbable. Zircon is often misunderstood. It shares a name with cubic zirconia, a synthetic diamond simulant, yet genuine zircon is a natural mineral, with ancient origins and one of the highest refractive indices among transparent gems. Its dispersion rivals diamond, and its birefringence is so high that looking through a faceted zircon often creates a ghosted double image of the pavilion. These characteristics should have elevated its status, yet for decades, zircon was relegated to the background. Unheated blue zircon flips that narrative. Most blue zircons on the market today are brown stones from Cambodia, heat-treated at 900 to 1,000 degrees Celsius to turn sky blue. While beautiful, the heating often removes internal zoning and may soften the brilliance. However, a genuine unheated blue zircon, especially one mined from Sri Lanka or Tanzania, exhibits a distinct identity, deeper saturation, uncompromised pleochroism, and crystalline integrity unaltered by thermal modification. These gems tend to form in high-pressure pegmatitic or granitic environments where the right balance of uranium, thorium, and heat flow determines their color potential. In scarce geological windows, where conditions produce a zircon that crystallizes with trace elements aligned just right, a natural blue emerges, never needing human intervention to shine. Historically, blue zircon once had spiritual significance in South and Southeast Asia. In Sri Lanka, early Buddhist texts mention zircons as part of temple ornamentation, their brilliance seen as a representation of purified thought. In Burmese lore, certain blue zircons were placed in water vessels during rituals to symbolize the sky's clarity, reflecting the impermanence of life. But the West did not fully embrace zircon. Its name, derived from Persian zargun, gold-colored, often confuses jewelers and collectors alike. By the time heat treatment became industrialized in the mid-20th century, zircon was already burdened by identity crises, mistaken for topaz, confused with synthetic stones, and eventually overshadowed by more consistent gems. The unheated variant never had marketing on its side. No mass supply chain, no consistent color yield, no auction drama. What it did have was a rarity that could not be replicated because it refused to be enhanced. In modern gemology labs, unheated blue zircon is tested not just for color origin, but for radiation balance. Natural zircons often contain radioactive elements in trace amounts, which over millions of years can partially alter their crystal structure. These metamic zircons lose transparency and must be rejected in faceting. But a naturally blue zircon that avoided both metamictization and artificial heating? That's a geological tightrope almost no other gem walks. Even among collectors, this gem occupies a niche, not as loud as Paraiba tourmaline, nor as publicized as spinel. Yet when shown under proper light, with its fiery dispersion and saturated blue reminiscent of twilight, it often outshines its more famous peers. But no two are alike, and there is no mine that produces them at scale. Each is a one-off occurrence, pulled from alluvial gravels by chance and luck. There is no roadmap to find the next unheated blue zircon, no lab formula to mimic it, no color calibration to make it sell. That may be the point. Ranked 6th, Nephrite Jade, the stone that measured a human life. Before diamonds ever entered the imperial court, before rubies were traded along the Silk Road, there was jade. But not just any jade, nephrite. In prehistoric China, it was not a gemstone. It was a moral instrument, a funerary seal, and a national philosophy in solid form. Nephrite is not the same mineral as jadeite, though both are called jade in English. Chemically, nephrite is a calcium-magnesium silicate, dense, fibrous, and extraordinarily tough. Its structure gives it a softness to the touch and a resistance to breakage that made it the ideal medium for shaping early ritual tools. In the Liangzhu culture, over 5,000 years ago, nephrite was already being carved into Kong tubes and bead discs, symbols not of decoration, but of cosmic alignment. Unlike transparent gems, nephrite jade often appears opaque or waxy in appearance. Its color palette ranges from white and gray-green to rich, spinach-hued colors. But its value wasn't judged by color alone. Chinese jade scholars valued its luster, known as hengan, a soft glow said to mimic human skin. When polished, nephrite doesn't reflect, it breathes. By the time of the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, nephrite jade had become a central component of burial customs. The wealthiest elites were entombed in full jade burial suits, hundreds or even thousands of interlocked plates of nephrite, sewn together with gold or silver wire. These were not displays of luxury. They were thought to preserve the body from decay and allow the soul to ascend intact. The most famous of these, Prince Liu Sheng's jade suit, contains over 2,000 pieces of nephrite and was hidden for over 2,000 years in an unplundered tomb in Hebei province. Even now, modern gemologists marvel at the precision. Each jade tile was carved to match the body's curvature, and every link was adjusted to minimize posthumous distortion. But nephrite's role extended far beyond death. Confucian texts from the Eastern Zhou period attribute human virtues to jade, including benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, and integrity. Holding a piece of nephrite was not a fashion statement. It was a matter of self-discipline. Officials wore jade pendants not to impress, but to remind themselves of their moral obligations. A cracked jade piece could mean a dishonored name. Trade networks from Central Asia eventually brought jadeite into China by the time of the Qing dynasty, and its glassier, more vividly colored cousin became the dominant material in jewelry. But nephrite never disappeared. It continued to play a quiet role in altars, offerings, seals, and state ceremonies. It was never the gem of choice for global markets, too opaque, too subtle, too unyielding to modern preferences. And yet in modern times, nephrite jade remains unshakable in its symbolism. No birthstone list mentions it. No engagement ring catalog features it. But in Chinese cosmology, it still defines the boundary between form and virtue. Its origin is equally grounded. Nephrite deposits in Xinjiang's Kunlun Mountains, particularly near Hotan, have been mined since the 3rd millennium BCE. These alluvial stones, often found in riverbeds, were considered gifts of the mountain spirits, smoothed over centuries by glacial runoff and spring floods. There are no massive gem shows dedicated to nephrite, no Sotheby's records, no price spikes, only quiet reverence and 1,000 years of uninterrupted use. Nephrite jade did not chase value. It was valuable, but only to those who understood what it measured. Ranked 5th, Carnelian, the silent authority in seals and skin. No stone ever spoke so loudly without making a sound. In Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Persia, and later Egypt, one gem consistently appeared in graves, temples, and official archives. Carnelian. Not rare, not brilliant, but essential. Geologically, carnelian is a variety of chalcedony characterized by deep red to orange coloration due to iron oxide inclusions. It forms through silica-rich solutions, settling in volcanic or sedimentary environments, then hardening over millions of years into microcrystalline masses. But its actual value wasn't geological, it was procedural. By 2500 BCE, Harappan artisans were already drilling and polishing carnelian beads with astonishing precision. Unlike gold or shell, carnelian resisted heat and acids. It could be etched, pierced, and polished to a high-gloss finish using stone drills and abrasives. Some of the oldest examples of lathe-spun jewelry in human history come from carnelian, but the stone's influence expanded beyond adornment. It became central to the most trusted objects in the ancient world. Seals. Cylinder seals in Mesopotamia and stamp seals in the Indus Valley were frequently carved from carnelian, not because it was beautiful, but because it was durable and resistant to wear. A message pressed into clay with a carnelian seal was not a suggestion. It was legal. It carried the authority of a temple, a court, or a ruler. In ancient Egypt, the stone gained symbolic elevation. The Book of the Dead includes specific mentions of carnelian used in amulets placed on the deceased. The most powerful among them, the heart amulet, carved from blood-red carnelian and positioned over the chest. Its role was not decorative. It was to prevent the heart from testifying against the soul in the Hall of Judgment. Even in Roman times, carnelian didn't vanish. It was still used for intaglios, engraved gemstones pressed into wax as part of signet rings. An intact carnelian intaglio meant your identity could not be forged. It wasn't just jewelry, it was security. Yet unlike emeralds or sapphires, carnelian rarely made it to royal inventories or auction blocks. It circulated among scribes, priests, merchants, and judges, people whose names often didn't survive, but whose seals did. Its production required knowledge, heat treatment to intensify the red, acid etching for contrast, drilling for stringing. These weren't just artistic techniques, they were cultural coatings. The deeper the orange, the stronger the protective symbolism. The smoother the polish, the higher the status. Today, carnelian still exists in grave goods across thousands of archaeological sites. From Mehrgar to Ur, from Abydos to Mycenae, its presence often predates the invention of writing itself. And yet, no single origin story explains its spread. It wasn't exported by conquest, it was adopted in parallel. In modern gemology, carnelian is often misclassified or lumped with agates. Its value in carats is low. Its commercial relevance is minimal. But in terms of cultural penetration, few stones surpass it. Carnelian was not rare, and that was its power. It was everywhere, but never ordinary. Ranked fourth, amber, time, trapped and taxed. It isn't stone, it doesn't sparkle, and it burns when held to flame. Yet for over 12,000 years, humans have cut, carved, worn, and even worshipped it. Amber is fossilized tree resin, not sap, not gum, but the sticky exudate that trees release in response to wounds. Over tens of millions of years, this resin hardened under pressure and in the absence of oxygen, preserving everything it touched: pollen, hair, feathers, even insects, with anatomical details sometimes finer than a microscope could resolve. But amber wasn't valued for preservation. It was valued for what it disrupted. In the Neolithic layers of northern Europe, beads of Baltic amber appear in places that never knew pine forests. Trade routes spanning hundreds of miles connected coastal gatherers with inland settlements. Long before gold or copper became widespread, amber was moved in bulk, carried, bartered, exchanged in secrecy, or used in ceremony. By the Bronze Age, it had become a controlled material. In Mycenaean Greece and Etruscan Italy, large carved amber pieces were buried in elite graves, sometimes alongside gold, but never mistaken for it. In Egypt, Baltic amber has been found in burials over 2,000 kilometers from its origin, suggesting not just trade, but prestige. The Romans codified their value. Under Emperor Nero, amber was taxed and stockpiled for use. Gladiators who fought in games honoring him were reportedly adorned not with armor, but with polished amber beads. Pliny the Elder recorded that a small amber figurine was more expensive than a healthy enslaved person. And still, Amber was misunderstood. It could be rubbed to produce static electricity long before the discovery of electrons. It could be ignited to produce sweet-smelling smoke, used in funerary rites from Sicily to Samarkand. And it could be carved thinner than bone, allowing fine details to be worn against the skin, believed to absorb illness or even ward off the evil eye. But amber's real secret was in what it preserved. A single piece could contain life forms from 30 to 90 million years ago, midges, ants, and flower parts, caught in motion, sealed in resin before they could decay. Some specimens contain feathers, bubbles of atmosphere, or entire predator-prey interactions frozen mid-conflict. Despite this, amber has rarely occupied the center of gemstone classification. It isn't crystalline, it isn't graded by clarity or cut, and it doesn't survive heat or solvents. Yet for archaeologists, it's a timeline. For jewelers, it's sculptural. For historians of medicine and mysticism, it was once thought to prevent epilepsy, calm childbirth, and absorb poison. In modern markets, amber continues to circulate quietly. Burmese and Dominican ambers carry rare blue hues, but most of the world's amber, over 80%, comes from Kaliningrad, Russia, and is still processed under state or semi-state control. The borderlands of Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine remain key but politically volatile zones in the amber trade. Some stones glitter to be seen. Amber was never meant for light. It was meant for memory. Rank third, jet, the fossil gem worn for grief, feared in power. Today it is often mistaken for cheap costume jewelry, a lightweight black bead, sometimes carved into cameos, sometimes set in silver, usually found in secondhand boxes labeled vintage. But jet was once so powerful and coded that entire social movements adopted and regulated its presence. Jet is fossilized driftwood, specifically coniferous trees that decayed under immense pressure over millions of years. It is not a mineral. It is not even, strictly speaking, a rock. It is organic carbon compressed into a compact, workable material, so soft it can be carved with a knife, yet dense enough to take on polish. Its story begins in reverse. In 19th century Britain, Queen Victoria turned jet into a symbol of state mourning. When Prince Albert died in 1861, she adopted a complete black lace ensemble, silk gloves, and jewelry. But not just any black jewelry. Only jet was deemed appropriate. Hard gemstones, such as onyx or obsidian, were considered too reflective. Jet, with its muted, velvety surface, absorbed light and attention. For 40 years, jet defined British grief. An entire industry formed around the coastal town of Whitby in Yorkshire, where high-grade jet was quarried, cut, and finished by hand. Mourning brooches, bracelets, buttons, even lockets designed to hold hair, were crafted under strict codes of etiquette. But long before Victoria's court turned it into a ritual, jet held a ritual of a different kind. In Roman Britain, jet was worn by the elite but feared by the superstitious. Pliny the Elder noted that jet, when burned, repelled snakes and detected a woman's unchastity. It was carried as an amulet to ward off epilepsy and the evil eye. In archaeological graves from York and Chester, jet beads appear alongside silver coins and glass, a strange mix of materials but not random. Jet was always included with purpose. Go further back, and jet appears in Bronze Age burials across the British Isles and Iberia, cut into discs, rings, and tubular beads. But these early pieces rarely moved beyond their point of origin. Unlike amber, jet didn't perform well in trades. Its surface scratched easily. Its meaning was local, insular, and tied to land-based beliefs. Even linguistically, jet was a fragment. The name derives from the Latin gagates, referencing the Gagas, a river in ancient Lycia, modern-day Turkey. But this had little to do with the British supply. When jet became popular again during the Art Deco revival of the 1920s, imitations, made from glass, vulcanite, and even black bakelite, flooded the market. The real jet industry collapsed, but authentic Whitby jet still survives in fragments. Mourning rings passed down quietly, untouched since the day they were sealed, brooches whose inscriptions have worn smooth from handling, tiny relics of a time when jewelry wasn't for glamour. It was for memory, protection, and control. And now jet is mostly silent. No mainstream market, no auction spikes, no labs grading its density. Only a few artisans in Yorkshire still work it by hand. Its power faded not from scarcity, but from familiarity. In the end, Jet did what it always did best. It absorbed. Ranked second, Bloodstone, the gem that belonged to none, but watched them all. Every culture it touched gave it a different name. In Persia, it was a guardian stone. In India, a vitality amulet. In medieval Europe, it was called heliotrope, sun turner, for reasons lost to mistranslation. But in English, the name that stuck was the one that never made sense geologically: Bloodstone. The stone is crypto-crystalline quartz, like agate and jasper, but formed in deep fissures where iron-rich fluids moved unpredictably. Its base is a deep, opaque green, darkened by chlorite and amphibolate inclusions. But what makes it unmistakable are the red specks, which scatter across the surface irregularly, not in veins, not in layers, as if spilt. They are hematite, iron oxide, but no one remembers the chemistry. What people remembered was the resemblance to blood and the myths that followed. In Christian folklore, Bloodstone was believed to have formed at the foot of the crucifixion. As drops of Christ's blood fell onto green jasper, the stone absorbed them. From this, medieval lapidaries assigned it powers: to stop bleeding, to bring rain, to offer invisibility in battle. Monks carried it, crusaders wore it. In some cases, it was mounted on weapons, not as decoration, but as a means of invocation. But this wasn't unique to Europe. In Indian Ayurveda, bloodstone was associated with purifying the blood and organs, a stone for detoxification and internal alignment. Yet no medical system has ever agreed on what it heals. Its meaning changed faster than its mineral composition. That may be why it survived. Bloodstone was never monopolized by a single empire, tribe, or religious system. No kingdom minted coins from it. No cathedral made altars of it. No jewelry house made it fashionable. Yet it kept appearing, on seals, on talismans, on personal items, always hidden, always meant for the wearer, not the viewer. In modern gemology, it barely registers. It's technically a variety of chalcedony. It's low on the Mohs scale. It has no dispersion. It rarely breaks $100 per carat, even for clean specimens. Lab tests identify it in seconds. Its sources, India, Brazil, Australia, are stable. Its color is unchanging. Yet the stone persists in private use. Healers still use it in rituals for grounding. Soldiers sometimes wear it as a quiet emblem. In Ethiopia, it's occasionally placed under the tongue during prayer. Not for miracles, for concentration. What makes bloodstone remarkable is not its rarity or value, it's the type of belief it attracts. Not a universal belief, not institutional belief, but small, personal belief. Its energy is not projected. It is absorbed. Its myths are not proclaimed. They are whispered. Unlike most birthstones, bloodstone has never been recognized as a traditional birthstone. It was never gifted, nor was it assigned. Those who chose it deliberately, for silence, for protection, for no one else to know. It was never a symbol of status. It was a stone of quiet agency, and it remains so. In first place, Lapis Lazuli, the stone that outlived every empire it served. Lapis Lazuli is labeled semi-precious. It sits in catalogs next to sodalite and dyed quartz. It's cut, carved, and sold by the gram in online bulk lots. Even in museums, it's often shown as pigment, crushed into ultramarine, preserved in paintings, erased of its original shape. But that's not how it began. Before Europe even had a concept of blue, lapis was already a currency of dominion. Its mines in Badakhshan, northern Afghanistan, supplied the elites of 3 continents. From those mountains, blocks were carried on foot, over deserts, rivers, and kingdoms, not to be worn, but to be enthroned. In Mesopotamia, lapis eyes were inlaid into statues of gods, deliberately deeper than the human iris, so that they could look past men. In Sumerian tablets, it was used to name power, such as lapis-laden throne, lapis-covered gate, and lapis-robed goddess. It wasn't a color, it was a proof of divine access. In ancient Egypt, it didn't stay on the surface. Lapis was buried. The famous funerary mask of Tutankhamun? Every band of blue was lapis, not enamel. Scarabs carved from it were placed under the tongue of the dead, not for beauty, but to replace the voice in the afterlife. Cleopatra wore it on her eyelids, not for seduction, but as war paint, ritual, coded, geopolitical. In the Indus Valley, long before pharaohs or priests, beads of lapis were strung without gold, because they didn't need it. Traders carried them along proto-silk roads. Some pieces traveled farther than any soldier did. And when fragments appear in ruins today, no one asks whose they were. They ask, how did they get here? Geologically, lapis isn't rare. It's a contact metamorphic rock, composed chiefly of lazurite, with specks of pyrite and calcite. But the optical depth of high-grade specimens from Sarisang, where the blue folds into itself like pigment suspended in stone, has never been replicated. And that's the point. Lapis wasn't precious because it was rare. It was precious because it was immovable. The mines stayed where they were. Empires came to them. Across centuries, it refused to become mainstream. It never became a diamond substitute. It never became an engagement stone. It never crossed into modern valuation metrics. And now in the 21st century, it's once again returning to silence. Demand for raw pigment has collapsed. Most lapis sold is dyed or stabilized. Authentic Sarisang material creeps, collector to collector, artisan to artisan, without headlines. However, the stone itself remains unchanged. It still contains sulfur, aluminium, sodium, silicate, yes, but also memory. Memory of palaces that crumbled, of gods renamed, of borders erased. More empires than any other gem have touched it, yet they never owned it. It passed through them and remained. None of these stones were chosen by accident. They were buried, not lost, encoded, not forgotten. Across ancient tombs, royal hoards, sacred shrines, and desert rituals, these birthstones weren't symbols of celebration. They were tools of silence, selection, and survival. What survives today is not just the material. It's the pattern of disappearance, of how a culture chooses to conceal power inside the geological. In gemology, origin is everything. But in history, what was hidden speaks louder than what was worn. This archive of 15 is not complete. It never was. And maybe it was never meant to be.